Paraflight, I'm back with your part 2 video of the Moster 185 rebuild. So we finally got all the parts in that came in the mail the other day. And we started out with the reed valve. So we just got the pedals. Those are your pedals there. So your pedals have a little flat edge on one side. So as you take off the two little screws, it's very important that you line everything back up. Like I said in the first video, you don't want to bend that metal, because that metal is what that curvature is set for, is the harmonic vibrations in those little pedals, because those little pedals are vibrating like hell when it's pulling fuel through there. So don't bend that metal. Make sure you just take those two little screws out and put that pedal on there. Whichever way that flat edge is on there is exactly the way it should go. So this is the new pedal, and I'm going to take this one off. I've already done the other side. Alright guys, so I've gotten a bunch of responses to my first video on the rebuild of the Moster 185. People are like, well, you didn't clean it out. Well, no kidding. I was just showing you the breakdown part of the motor. So we got the pedals back in the little reed valve body, and remember I showed you that you hold it up to a bright light and it should be completely sealed inside of the little wedge of cheese. So what we do is I took all of the base gasket off. I remember you guys, we probably saw that green gasket that was all, caked on there. We checked the connecting arm, we checked the needle bearing down in the crankcase. We did not need to scope anything, or we didn't need to pull or split the crank for this particular rebuild. I said it's very important to check those little brass washers, like oil bearing washers down in the bottom. Those are super important. But I cleaned everything up really well. I use a wire brush, I use a flat edge razor, and I get it all off of there. And then I even hit it sometimes with like a rotary wire brush just to clean it up, to get any gunk or any divots or anything like that. The head, I don't know if you guys recall, it was all filled with carbon. We've got the head completely cleaned back down to manufacturer, brand new spec. What I will do is with the new head gasket, we'll take a little bit of AMSOIL or any oil that you guys run in your engine and just lubricate the head gasket. You also want to lubricate the base gaskets as well. It's super important. So lubricate the base gasket on both sides and then put it on over the engine. And then you're going to lubricate obviously the piston really well. Here's your new piston. This is a common question that I get. What's the arrow for? That little arrow there goes to the exhaust. It will always go to the exhaust. And if you notice, there's these little portholes there, and there's no portholes over there. So you got fuel injection, and then you got exhaust. So that's what the arrow means on the piston. And you can see there's kind of a point on the piston, and on the previous piston it had a hole in it, so this has gotten basically flattened out. The pistons, I do recommend a manufacturer OEM piston, simply because if the motor is still within a warranty, or you have an issue or something fails, or they're going to ask you which piston you put in there. People have put aftermarket pistons in, and I've noticed you do get a little more power, but you do burn them up a little quicker. They don't last as long as the OEM piston, and these are Vertex pistons. They're like dirt bike pistons. So I have no idea where these people are making this stuff, and we'll go over that when we reassemble it all back together. I don't know if you guys remember when I cleaned the jug. The jug had some serious gouging in here, so we resurfaced all that, and then that little porthole, which is right here, I don't know if you can see it in the light. I will get a light for you. So that little porthole there, that little port is extremely important that it's clear. So we run a drill bit through that and we clean it out. We're gonna blow everything out with carb cleaner. I even will clean out the bottom of the crankcase. I will blow all the jets out with carb cleaner. I will use a pneumatic air compressor and blow everything out on both the bottom of the crank and on this. And then I'm going to take my AMSOIL lubrication. I'm going to lube everything up in here. I'm going to lube the piston up when it's all back together. And I will compress the rings, and then I will have somebody slowly wiggle the jug back down, making sure that the rings are sitting on the pins. So there are two little pins. There's a pin right there, and there's a pin right there. So your rings come together, and the ends must meet at that pin. So you have to compress the rings, and you can wiggle down. There is a compression ring tool that you can use. It's this tool right here. I do not like it. These engines are so small, they're hard to get to. I just use my fingers, compress it, and have somebody start to wiggle, and it hurts you get fingers and pinched in there sometimes, but you just wiggle it down until it's sealed. That way you know the rings did not come off of their little pins. And then you can see in the bottom of the piston, the new needle bearing. which will go in here. And we'll show this to you again. We'll just show you little clips. And then, so the needle bearing is going to go in, the wrist pin's going to go in, and then this is going to go down there, and then the clips will go in on each side of the piston. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes. We're going to clean everything out really well. And then we are going to start to reassemble, and we'll just give you guys little snippets of the reassembly. So another question you guys asked are, here are your different exhaust bolts. You can see one of them, for some reason, they always get this like snow color on there, and then one of them is just a straight black color. Different posts on them. So one's a softer, one's a harder piston. So you want to make sure that you're putting the right, not piston, rubber exhaust gasket. You want to make sure that you're putting the right gasket in the right location. So if you're not sure, go to aerolite.com. They have a really nice diagram up there, and you can actually see it on the website. So we'll be back with you guys in a couple of minutes, and I will just show you just little snippets as far as moving forward here, putting this back together. All right, guys, so we're gonna put the base gasket on. So come on over here. So you could see I put a nice, I cleaned everything out, carb cleaned everything out, used the pneumatic air pressure, blew everything out really well. We lubricated the bottom of the crank really well with just straight up AMSOIL. There's the AMSOIL right there. It's AMSOIL Sabre synthetic 2-stroke oil. It's not that bad, it's like 15 bucks a quart. So we got everything lubed up. So now we're getting ready to put the base gasket on. So if you have a base gasket and there's an edge of the base gasket that was sticking out, you're gonna use a mic, and you're gonna mic the edge to kind of get the thickness, because if you use what was crushed by the jug, it's not gonna be the same. So normally on these engines, it's a 0.3. So how do we do that? So we're gonna just take this and we're going to close the mic down. So that's a 0.1. And these are millimeter. So we'll go to the next one. So that looks like a 0.1. So this one feels a little thicker. So that's a 0.2. So this one feels the thickest. That is a 0.4. So maybe the last one on my finger is a lucky number 3. So that looks like it's a 0.2. So I didn't get a 0.3 in that one. So we're gonna check this one again. It's a 0.1, those are 0.1s. This one feels a little thicker. Oh. So it appears that that one is pretty close to our 0.3. So that's what we're going to use. So we're going to use the AMSOIL. We're going to lubricate all around that on both sides, and then we're going to slide that down. Obviously, it only goes on one way because of the way it fits. So what this does on the base is it determines the top stroke of the piston. So that little gasket determines at the top of the explosion, basically the combustion, when the piston gets to the top, to the spark plug ignition. So that's what that's all about. We're going to put this together, and then we'll show you us putting the piston on. Alright, so we got a new needle bearing, and I literally just doused it in just a little cap full of oil. So this is our connecting arm. Needle bearing is going into the connecting arm. So here is our piston. So to make it easy, we know that the little arrow is going to point to our exhaust side. So what we did was we put the clip in the back of the piston already. I don't know if you can see it in there. Because what we're going to do is we're going to mount the piston in here like this on the wrist pin. And it's going to just allow us to have to work with the front of the piston with the second clip here to lock it all together. So a lot of people will put this in or put this pin side in, and then they got to deal with it from the back of the motor. It's hard to get to. The pin pops out, you lose the pin, it becomes an issue. So once we get the piston connected, we'll install the piston rings, because right now with them moving around on there, we don't want to scratch anything up. And we don't want to, mess anything up as far as scoring the side of the piston with the edge of the ring until we're ready to compress it. All right, so here are our piston rings. Here's another misconception. So you could see that there's like a little slant here in the piston ring. I don't know how, in this light, how well you can see that. I'll put a little light here on it. There's a little, like, kind of a little bite that's slanted in, and then on the back side of it, it's completely flat. So as you're looking at the piston, there's those little pins that I showed you. That little slant is actually going to pinch together like this. So that those little edges there are catching that pin, and what that piston is going to do is it's going to scrape the wall of the jug as the piston is going up and down. So you've got two pistons there, so they're working up and down like this, and they're offset a little bit. So what happens is sometimes you guys score, or you guys have a ring that you didn't put on right, so the ring will slip around and that scores the side of your wall and it seizes your engine. So that is a real common issue that I see. And I mean, I've literally rebuilt probably 100+ Moster, just paramotor engines in general. And the most common thing is the piston ring should sit in there like this on the pins, and they're both in the same direction when I pull them apart. Anyway. Okay, so we got the piston on, we got the jug over, and again, the way we did the piston is I lined the rings up with the pins, and then I squeezed, and then I had a friend just kind of wiggle the jug over the studs, and then I just continued to make sure that all the pins and the rings were where they were supposed to be. We kind of wiggled it over, and then from the rest of the way, you just kind of lightly tap it and it falls down. So we put our head gasket, which is this guy here. We lubricated it with the AMSOIL. We put that in the head, and then we have our new washers and our new locking head bolts. Again, those head bolts compared to the head bolts where the head or the cooling fin goes, you can see they're very different. There's nothing in there that's locking. These little copper bolts are heated and they are locking bolts. So it is extremely important that you use those, or you have something comparable that's high temp that's not going to loosen up over wear and tear, just hours of use and heat and expansion, which is what happened with these guys. And there was a huge gap in the head, so we got lots of extra air in there. We ran it lean, and then we burned it up. So we also, while we had it out, we had the studs, new studs put in, and the new 10mm locking bolts. We didn't have these 13mm that were just nylock. You can't use nylock on something that gets that hot, because this manifold heat coming out of here is a couple hundred degrees over your head temp. So you need these locking copper bolts here and the washer behind that, so that doesn't heat and loosen up, and then you're getting oxygen in there, so you're going to lose your vacuum. So the rest of this, we gotta rebuild the carburetor, which we will video. And then I put the new vacuum tube on here. The old vacuum tube looked like an automotive tube, so we put a new vacuum tube on here. And like I was explaining in that first video, there's a dimensional airspace in the bottom of the crankcase, which is where this length of this tube comes from. So this engine should run really smooth and balanced throughout all RPMs now. And then we're gonna use the correct exhaust spring tensions to put the exhaust back together. We'll show you that, but I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, because you're going to take it off and put it back together exactly how you took it off. Okay, so here's your Walbro carburetor for the Moster 185. You got your 4 little screws. We're going to take those screws out, and then we're going to take those 4 little screws out. Before we do anything on typically any rebuild, you're going to screw the high jet and the low jet back in, count how many turns you go back in so that you know where you started at. And then obviously there's a manufacturer spec on all of these. If it's the first time you've rebuilt the engine, I would just put it back exactly where it was. You may want to rich in the high jet just a little bit for break-in. And then this is your idle set screw right here. So if you put it back to factory settings, maybe make the high jet a little rich just for break-in. You can bump up the idle screw a little bit. The RPMs on this motor, you really want between, like, they say 18 to 2200. I find like 22 to 2300 RPMs is usually pretty good, because it just eliminates a lot of the excess vibration in the engine. It'll salvage the exhaust system and stuff like that. A lot of the paramotors out there, when they start to idle low, they vibrate a lot, and then you start having issues, and like the engine mounts will break or the exhaust breaks. So I like to bump them up just a little bit. If it's got the clutch on there, what I do is I set it up so that it literally is idling right before it would start to spin the prop on its own. So it'll start to spin the prop, and then I back it back down, and then I set it right there, so that
the prop's not spinning, but if I give it just a little bit of power, it's going to start to rotate. So I will pull this apart, I'll lay all the diaphragms out, and then I will show you the reinstall. So here are your diaphragms laid out on the bench. So you've got your actual physical diaphragm here, and then you got your washer. So a lot of people get those confused when they put them back in. They put them back in backwards, so you're actually suffocating the flow of fuel, and the motor won't start, it won't idle right or anything like that. One misconception on these two guys right here, if you notice, there's like these two little holes, and then there's like a little line, and then another little hole, and then over this one has one little hole or one little circle, and then it's just a straight line. There's no circle at the other end of it. That's actually an important factor because it messes with your fuel flow. So a lot of people just don't pay attention, and they think they're the same, and they're not. And you can see the differences. You got two holes here, and then you just got one hole there. So make sure that you're putting it back exactly the way it is in your system, whatever your motor is. This little diaphragm here, I find a lot of carburetors that people rebuild do not put this diaphragm back in. That little diaphragm, if you don't put that back in there, you'll notice that when you pulled these out after you got to rebuild it again, the exhaust, or the fuel and the ethanol literally cakes this material. This is the gasket material. It cakes it right to the carburetor, and then you got to use a little metal brush and stuff like that. And 90% of the reason is because you did not use that little diaphragm in there. And then same thing, this is where you're going to prime the motor. Not all of these carb kits. You guys buy some carb kits that don't have that little button on there, that little nipple on there, which goes into the little pin, the little needle here. The little spring that comes out of that, that's actually what they call your pop-off pressure. So there's a pop-off pressure tool that you can buy. Most of the time it's already set from the manufacturer. And then of course your fuel filter your screen from the fuel filter. So there are some pieces that we don't use, and that's these guys here. We don't use that. I have used this little clip here with this little washer right here in the past before. That actually is in this little piece, the metal piece that comes out of the carburetor, which we'll show you here in a second. But we do not use this stuff typically. Like I said, in all the engines I've rebuilt, I've used that little clip and that little spring one time because the one that was in the carburetor was destroyed. If you're on eBay, that is what you need to order for a Walbro rebuild for a Moster. And there's a lot of paramotors out there with the Walbro 37. So that is the rebuild kit. You can look it up on eBay. You can find them at your local lawnmower shop. You can typically find them for about $7 to $15. But you definitely want to do an OEM rebuild because I have used the aftermarket stuff and it just doesn't hold up as well. More to come in a minute. Alright, so we got everything apart. That's what it looks like on the inside. And as you can see, the diaphragms pretty much match. There's holes on there, and there's like these little nipples that are on the carburetor, so it's almost impossible not to put them back properly. But you can do it. So that is where your little needle goes, and then your spring, which is all this stuff over here. And it's pretty self-explanatory because you're looking at it. When you pull it apart, you're actually looking at it. I don't know if you guys ever noticed, but that's the spring that came out of there. I'm trying to get it in focus. I don't know if you can see it. There's this big thing of fuzz in there. I'll see if I can get it in my finger. So there it is on my thumb. Do you see that fuzz there on the tip of my thumb? Right there, now it's on my finger. So that is actually from the ethanol in the fuel. And there's a lot of people that say, well, I don't use ethanol. I use ethanol. I've been running ethanol. I've got over 4,000 hours of paramotoring, and I've run ethanol on every single motor. And the only thing that I've noticed that's different is that if you use avgas, which is low lead 100, you lose a little bit of power. It runs a little cooler, but I'd rather have the extra power. So every 100 hours, I suggest you rebuild your carburetor. If you start noticing like mid-range where it's kind of chirping a little bit, it's probably carburation. So you got to rebuild the carburetor, and most of the time it's that little tiny screen right there, and you can pull it off, and that little screen sits right here, and that little screen will get filled up with gunk, and it'll mess up your mid-range. And I use just a dental pick right there to pull that little screen out. It's pretty straightforward, it's pretty simple, and that usually will fix your problem. So back to what I was telling you about gaskets. So that's what they had in there, and if you notice, it's got the two, so it's got the one with the two holes at the end, which is typical, but it did not have that diaphragm in there. That's an important part. That diaphragm is an important piece. So not that that contributed to the engine burning up, because as I mentioned in the first video, there was a lot of air getting into this motor that it shouldn't have been, and a lot of it came into fact with the head bolts, and they were literally, like I said, I think I showed you in the video, it was hand tight. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean this out really good, maybe use a little wire brush. We're going to use carb cleaner. You can get a carb cleaning, literally looks like a bucket of paint, like a gallon bucket of paint. It's got a little basket, you can put the carburetor in there, you can soak it in the carb cleaner, you pull it out, and then you're going to use a pneumatic gun to blow it out with air. You want all that crud and crap out of there, blow it out really well. I just use a can of carb cleaner. I spray it into all the orifices in the actual carburetor, and you'll see some debris come out. I'll use a little wire brush to get any grit and stuff that's stuck on there. I don't want to scrape it where I'm actually wearing down like the little ridges in there. Just a little bit, just to get it clean, and then I will blow it out with air really well, and then we will put it all back together exactly the way we took it apart. So I will show you in the diaphragms here in segments here, just in little 5-second segments, so that you can see how it's going back together. Okay, so we put our screen in there, we put our two little membranes. So the membrane is up against the carburetor, the gasket's up against this outer plate here, and then we got our screws back in there. Hand tight. You can put a little blue Loctite on there if you'd like. I don't, because I just check them, I don't know, every 2 hours or so that I fly. So we just put the spring and the new needle, and then the set screw, which is that little black screw right there. And if you notice, I've seen this messed up before too. So here's the old one. So a lot of people, if you notice, there's like a little bump right there. Okay, that bump is what sits like that in the spring. I've gotten them in there like installed like that. I don't even know how that people got them back together, but that little bump right there is going to sit in the middle of the spring, and then that little horseshoe goes underneath the needle, and then you got to put the little pin through the hole there, this little pin here, and then that little set screw. So again, I'll show it to you one more time. That's what it looks like. And we put that set screw in, just back to hand tight. You don't need to be torquing any of this stuff. So here is where that diaphragm, remember I was telling you about the diaphragm? So here's that little diaphragm. That little diaphragm fits in here like that. It's a real flappy. So that's going to go in here like that. They had this in there. Now whether they actually knew what they were doing or not. So that is the one that I'm going to put in, because that's normally the one that we use. So that's going to fit on top of that like that. Again, diaphragm, then you got your little plate, and you can see this one's still stuck. This is, so I got to scrape that off, clean it, and then I will put that plate back in there. And that other screen that I said we don't use, that's where that screen and that clip goes. So I will just blow that out with some carb cleaner, make sure it's clean and clear, put it back in, and we'll put the two little set screws in, which are these little guys right here. And then we're going to have the little membrane, which is what will press down. So when you guys prime your carburetor, the little membrane is pressing down on that spring, and that's where your pop-off pressure comes in. So that membrane, when you press the thing to depress the carb to prime, you're opening that up, you're priming, and then of course you've got your gasket, which is going to be on the inner. So this one is actually a little different than the other side. So, and these are typically done right. You can see there's a nipple on there. Sometimes you'll get a kit, you'll get the wrong kit, it won't have that little nipple on the end of that. Matter of fact, that one doesn't. So that's the one, that was the wrong carb kit they used. This is the right carb kit, the one that I showed you the picture of. So here's the little nipple that depresses that little spring. So that is everything put back together. Membrane on the bottom side, gasket on the top side, so we got a good seal. And then that little nipple that I was explaining 2 seconds ago, that one right there that my finger's pointing to, goes in that little horseshoe right there. And finally, with the carburetor, when you pull the high jet out, you're gonna have a little copper like an O-ring, and then you're gonna have a little rubber donut washer there. Make sure you pull those out, because you guys blow it out with carb cleaner, or you dip it in the gallon carb cleaner kit that you can get at like Advanced AutoZone or Walmart or something like that. And then you hit it with the pneumatic air gun to dry it, and you end up blowing those little washers all over the place. You can't find them. And then that washer needs to be a washer that can hold up against the gasoline and whatnot. So then you gotta end up ordering new parts, because they do not come in the carb kit. So make sure you take those out when you remove this high jet. They're underneath the high jet. And that is going to be it for the carburation. And then it's going to just simply be put back together exactly the same way that we pulled it apart, and we're just going to put the gaskets on there. So we've got the neck, the gaskets, and then we've got all the new stuff here, which we'll replace everything with. So after we get to the carburetor, we will put the exhausts back on with the new springs and the new gaskets on. The exhaust look like it's going to need to get a new rivet. We'll put the air hose back on, and then I'll just put a little pinch of fuel line on there to keep anything from getting in the engine, a new plug in it, and then we will package this thing back up and ship it off to its owner, and they can do the break-in for it. And if you're lucky, maybe they'll post a video of the break-in process.
So in conclusion, if you guys have questions, feel free to, I've had a lot of you guys email me on the YouTube, the first post, and I will get the second part 2 up here in the next couple of days. Feel free to email me or text message me and ask me questions. If you guys have any concerns or something doesn't make sense, or you're looking for help, or if you're not sure, contact somebody that's done this type of stuff before. Everything that you pull apart, you are going to clean. You're going to use carb cleaner. I'll use carb cleaner for the bottom of the crank and stuff like that. Just air it out real good, and then make sure you lubricate it with the oil that you're running in your motor. And then follow your break-in instructions. I typically will have all my students, every flight, not meaning they fly in the morning, fly in the evening, but they fly for the day, and then at night before they go to bed and get up to fly the next morning, just check your head bolts, and then make sure your spark plug is torqued down to the right spec. We are going to put a head temp on there. What I recommend you do, rather than buy the 14mm head temp gauge, which is the TTOs that you guys get on eBay, or you get it from Aerolite, what I recommend that you do is get a 10mm head temp, and what you're going to do is you're going to install it on the bolt. So if that's the way that the motor is sitting in your engine, okay, you got your carburation side here. I recommend that you guys install it on this bolt right here on the carburation side. So you do not want to put it on the exhaust side, because if you put it on one of these 2 bolts here, you're not getting the accurate reading. So I recommend you put it on this bolt right here, the bolt closest to the pilot, on the carburation side. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you a pretty accurate reading. It may be off. When I use the infrared gun, it's off about maybe 10 to 12 degrees. So just add 10 or 12 degrees to whatever your temperature is, and you're getting a true head temperature. Do not remove that crush washer under the spark plug. And the reason for that is that backs out a little bit, because there's a purpose to that crush washer. So you guys put that copper ring under that crush washer, torque it all down, it backs up, you get air in there, you burn a hole in your piston. Put it on the head bolt, and even though you may be a 10-degree off, you'll never have that engine burn a hole in the piston, because that 10, you're putting a $30 gauge on there that's costing you a couple $100 to repair. So put it on the carburetor head bolt closest to the pilot, and you will never have that problem again. It's a 10mm diameter is what I recommend you get. You can get them on eBay. Any motorcycle shop typically will have the TTO stuff. If you guys have any questions, Paraflightnc.com, Paraflightnc.com. Again, this is Brian with Paraflight, and I look forward to talking to you guys in the future with engine rebuilds. If you're looking for training, We do have a 1,500 acre grass strip airfield. It's a total of a 3,000 acre airfield. It's 2,500 foot grass strip runway. We do have a 40-person dormitory on our site. It's $45 a night to come up. If you want advanced training, we can do that. Or if you just want to come up and watch, we're 30 minutes from the ocean. We are in New Bern, North Carolina, which is about 30 minutes from Cherry Point and Camp Lejeune, so we're kind of smack in the middle. And we typically are out here every weekend with our local pilots. We've got about 25 local guys. Look forward to hearing from you guys.